we begin to, as seekers, seekers of the truth, there tends to be a dynamic where you believe that if you recondition yourself, if you do something, then you will get to non-duality. That if you start challenging your behaviors, if you do the chakra breathing, if you work on the personal self, if you go to special gurus with really strong energy, if you go on retreats, that you'll get to non-duality, that you can make it to non-duality, but who? It's impossible. You can't get to non-duality. You are non-duality. That which looks out of your eyes now is non-duality. This presence, there's always presence. You can't get out of it. You can try and run as much as you like I'm gonna get away from consciousness. And you're always in consciousness. There's always consciousness. There cannot be a leaving of it. There cannot be a removal from it. You are that. And what comes and goes is this daydream, this illusion of you. And then you think that you can work on the body to release that illusion. I think that if you're really, really full of self, if there's a lot of suffering and difficult emotions and difficult ideas in the system, then it's more than likely harder to hear non-duality because there's so many clouds in the way. But it's not anybody that hears non-duality. Like, you're not going to release your karma about your friends or your father or your relationship to women or your relationship to money or to God or to society and get to non-duality. You're not going to have that emotional discharge and suddenly get rid of all emotions and arrive in some bliss. Non-duality means the acceptance of all emotions. There's nothing that cannot happen. It's not something personal. It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't mean that you're going to get to a place where you stop having karma or you stop having emotional reactions. There's so many people that teach that, but I think it's out of a fantasy of the teacher or out of an emotional deadness of the teacher. The body's still going to have its reactions. Over time, it will evolve and expand more and more to the realization, but it's not suddenly just going to realign all the neural pathways in the body and in the mind. Like, we think of ourselves as somebody, so it's like we're going to get enlightened and we're going to stop being angry, but actually the anger and the disharmony with your work colleagues is neural pathways and energies inside the body that aren't just going to shift like that. It's not that. That isn't awakening. That's something that you do, this reconditioning. And yeah, non-duality, the realization of it, can recondition you to make you a better you. So any emotion can arise in awakening. It's not about having a peaceful mind. It's not about having peaceful reactions or not arguing with your partner anymore, or having the perfect children or the perfect life. It's not about that. Or stress not arising because of bills. It's not that. Believing it's that will perpetuate the seeker, because you're always looking, what you're actually looking for is a perfect you and a perfect life, and that is seeking. It's this idea that one day you're going to arrive. It's not that. What is here now? What never leaves? What's not separate from everything? And this isn't an intellectual realization. There can be intellectual realizations, and there can be all these like different awakenings and shifts that happen, but it's not an intellectual awakening, and it's an energetic shift from being a person to being consciousness, or the experiencer, which is everything. You could say everything experiencing itself, whichever you like. Not a consciousness that's removed from all things, a consciousness that is all things, and it's an energetic shift. And it happens because it happens. It's unknowable. It's something that happens. It normally, more than likely, follows a cause and effect to an extent. Like I know, and I have met people that it happens randomly to, where where they're just living their life, and then there's suddenly this energetical shift. And then I've met lots and lots of people also that follow some form of teaching, non-dual teaching, and then this shift happens. And I've spoken to a few people, quite a few people that had a shift while listening to me speak. It's not me though that did it. It's nothing to do with me. It just so happens that it was remembered. It was grace. I mean, how can you describe that mystery of why it happens? And in another way, you can say that it never happens, because there's always it's always consciousness experiencing itself. There's just an illusion that arises inside consciousness, but consciousness is not disturbed. Consciousness can never get disturbed. It's no thing, or presence, if you prefer presence, or aliveness cannot get disturbed, because it's not a thing. It has no qualities to it. It's absolutely empty of every quality, but yet it is all things. It's in everything. It's like you think that you're sitting as a body inside a body watching the room, but actually there is simply the room. There isn't a location inside the body. It's an idea that gives it a feeling that there's a location in the body. It's ideas that make it feel like this repetition of you, that there's somebody here. Just like when you have lots of anger, you feel it in your body, like you have lots of angry thoughts, like they're an asshole, they did this to me, and then you have lots of angry thoughts and blaming thoughts. You feel it in your stomach, or you feel it in your heart, you feel it in your body. The you story has been happening for many generations. And so it's a genetical thing. And then also as soon as you're born, you kept being told you're in there. So then you're suddenly like, yes, I'm a person that's experiencing inside the body. But as a baby, there was just innocence. There wasn't a sense that this is my hand, this is my hand, this is my nose, and I'm in relationship to the world. There was simply the world experiencing itself. It didn't even have a body, the baby. It didn't even know it was a baby experiencing through a baby the world. As you get older, and when the awakening happens when you're older, it's seen that life is looking through these bodies, but it's at the same time not really. It's experiencing itself just from a particular angle, seemingly. But then also, when you're just sitting looking at the sunset, there is no angle, there is only sunset. All this idea of angle or location or divide or you and me is simply ideas that humans have embedded into their psyche. Me, mine. And it most probably formed when we began to use language, when we began to herd, when we began to have properties. So when we began to keep animals, we began to have property, and then there began to be this mine. This is mine, this is yours. And we began to label things, and what was yours. You have the body, you have your thoughts, you have your feelings, you have your wife, you have your husband, you have your children, you have your animals, you have your home, and all of that belongs to you. And then this keeps being indoctrinated into us, generation. But prior to humans being able to speak, prior to language forming, who was experiencing the world? They didn't have language. They didn't have the ability to say mine or me or he or her or she or anything else. So who did they think they were? Who were they imagining themselves to be? If they couldn't speak and they couldn't think, they couldn't look in a mirror and be like, that's me. Oh, aren't I pretty? How would they think that? How would they know that? How? There is just watching happening and innocence. It's so hard to imagine, though. I remember once, and I said to my dad, we were talking about dogs, and my dad really wasn't into non-duality at all. Neither of my parents are into the subject. And I remember I was walking along, and he said, the dog thinks this. And I said, but Dad, how would the dog think without language? And he was like, don't be ridiculous. Dogs can think without language. And I agree that there is some form of images that arise, but how can they think? How can they string the sentence together like, oh, what a beautiful window that is? How do they think that? There could be an image of a window and a sensation of pleasure. There can be some sense of time, but they can't actually think. Thinking requires speaking. It could be that we don't understand dog language. I mean, they do have language amongst each other, but it's not complex enough in order to be claiming who they are and saying, oh yes, my name is Khaleesi and I have beautiful ears and a beautiful face, and my owner is a sucker. She always does everything I want. I just have to bark and stamp my foot, and there she comes running. She really can't think like that. It's just innocence experiencing. But it's so hard to imagine. Like, my dad was a very intelligent man. He was a computer programmer that wrote programs for companies with 500, 600, 700 employees, and he'd write the whole thing. He was very intelligent and very capable, but he couldn't imagine, like, he just thought I was ridiculous that a dog couldn't think. Like, it was a ridiculous, preposterous idea that animal couldn't think. So to most of society, and maybe even to you're listening, like, it doesn't mean that you're stupid or that you don't understand concepts, but we're so used to personifying everything, to projecting human mentality onto everything. We can't imagine that other animals don't think or don't identify like we do. And if they don't identify, if they don't think, they don't identify with their body. And I know your mind is like, how is that possible? But then who are they if they don't imagine themselves as a body? Like, you imagine yourself as a body. So if I asked you who you are, you'd start naming the body, your feelings, your financial balance, your house, what your personality is like, how your emotions are, what people think of you, what you think of yourself. You'd name all these things, and then you have an image held in your brain of, like, thin or fat or blonde or white or black or beautiful or ugly. And then you're always imagining that when you're referring to yourself. But if you're an animal and you can't think, how can you imagine yourself as a body? Like animals, some animals, there's about 5, I think, that can recognize themselves in the mirror in some way, but most can't. So who do they think they are? Yes, what was I going on about? So who do they imagine themselves to be? Who? Who let the dogs out? Who? If they can't think, if they can't speak, then when they look out, they don't think, I have a nice fluffy tail, I am a beautiful wolf. They just are. They are experiencing that innocence. Like, when you're creating art or when you're doing something you really enjoy, you completely forget yourself and you just are. There just is this consciousness that's not like thinking about itself. It's simply experiencing innocently. And it's not actually divided, but your mind can't comprehend that. In those moments, your consciousness begins to expand. That's why it feels like joy. That's why we get addicted to doing these activities in which we lose ourselves. Because it feels like joy, but actually what it is the disidentification with the body, which is freedom. It's not actually, it does produce joyful feelings in the body, but that's a lie to think that's it. It's actually this expansion that who you are is empty of feeling, empty of emotion, empty of thoughts, empty of anything. It's just love. It's content. It's totally content in itself, as itself. And it's there all the time looking out. So back to the question, who gets enlightened? Consciousness is always here. What stands in the way is this idea of somebody that can get enlightened. Who gets enlightened? Okay, I take some questions now. I've blabbered on.